Hi, I'm Fiona Keller. I'm a freelance stage manager for theatre.
Hi Fiona, welcome to the Access. It's great to have you. So yeah, a freelance stage manager who has worked across, so many companies. And we'll talk about, say, the predicament of being a freelance stage manager in the current, because we're still, for those findings on the internet in a decade's time, we're still in the process of trying to emerge from COVID lockdown. But take me back, kind of, yeah, how did you get into stage management?
I kind of fell into stage management a little bit. So like I went to Closhadoolig and you kind of do, well, you did. It's a bit different these days, of course, but you did a bit of everything. You did costume, lighting, performance, set design. So kind of when I left college, I knew a little bit of everything, but not enough of anything. And then I did a couple of profit share shows kind of as a stage manager. And then I got trapped and I never left.
What kind of was before Closhadoolig, was the theatre kind of something you always wanted to get into? Was it like when you were growing up, was kind of like,
Yeah.
Was acting and dancing and performing kind of something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, like I mean, I'm a drama kid, so like I did drama all through school pretty much. I had like good English and primary school teachers that drama would have been part of our school education. Then I went to Betty Ann Norton. And then I was also in ITI for a little bit. But like, I was very clear that this was always going to be, I didn't really mind where I ended working in theatre, but I knew that I wanted to be in theatre. I blame NGM musicals for that. Like, yeah, oh God, like all of the musicals like have like backstage theater. It's all like this beautiful world where everything looks so magical and cool, but then the reality is a little bit different.
But come here, I think there's kind of, that's really interesting that you kind of had a sense that you wanted to be in theatre. It didn't matter where, that, because I think that you kind of talk to an awful lot of people in theatre, and there is that sense of, certainly for me, of like loving the spaces and just loving the sense of being backstage and being behind the stage, and kind of that sense of, it's like Christmas morning, well, yeah, maybe not every tech, but yeah, but I think there's also the sense of, but that must be really interesting that you kind of, was it that you were open for it all then? It wasn't just, I want to be an actress, it's kind of whatever gets you.
Yeah, and I definitely think when I was in college, I knew that I wasn't probably going to be an actor. But yeah, I think I was always just interested in the concept of making theatre. I was fascinated by how the lighting works, how the stages get built, how the stages get moved. Like I saw ballets and pantos quite a bit when I was a kid. So like the scale and the spectacle of that kind of stuff was as fascinating to me as the people on the stage.
Okay.
And yeah.
And what sort of musicals then? What would have been the kind of ones that you watch over and over again?
Oh, I mean, I used to be able to sing the entire soundtrack to Wicked when it first came out, like that. Like when I was in college, I used to drive from Rathfarnham to Coolock, and that would be blared out of my tiny little car. So like people like at the toll booth at 8 o'clock in the morning, the window would roll down and like there'd be show tunes flying out of the windows. I definitely woke a few people up, I'd say, on their way to work.
Yeah. And were you kind of singing along in the car with them? Like, do you sing?
Oh no, like I'm not a singer, but like I'd sing when the window closed in my car at the top of my voice. Yeah, no problem.
Come here, you were saying that, was it in your family? Did you go to the shows at a young age, or was it something you found yourself?
Yeah, like my nana would have been very into theatre, and like she would have brought, I mean, she's got loads of grandkids, but we would have been brought to pantos as kind of like a Christmas treat. And then I'm like the eldest girl, so I would have been brought to a lot of ballets, things like that, kind of as I was growing up. And like I had an interest in the theatre and like in dance and stuff like that. So like my nana did costumes at one point for the Gaiety and stuff like that, like when she was much younger. So like she'd have a little bit of a go on her for that kind of stuff. So it was always a bit of a treat. Like, yeah.
And then in college, like when you kind of said, okay, acting's not for me, like, what was it then? Because stage management is such a kind of crucial role, and obviously you've done production managers and kind of site manager as well. But that kind of having the reins or holding the reins for shows and kind of being the person who kind of holds the show, on paper. When did that kind of start? Because you went on to college elsewhere after that, didn't you? Didn't you go to away?
Yeah. So like I did a top up year in Middlesex to get my degree. So
Okay.
Dualig's just a diploma. And like in Dualig, they never really define, like when I was there, the role of a stage manager was kind of called a production manager. It hadn't quite been defined. Marie Tierney was trying to make them use the right terms, but they weren't quite ready to go there yet. So like my concept of a stage manager was somewhere between, like calling the show. I did that a couple of times in college and I did enjoy that. I think I got off in the power a little bit, to be honest with you. That's definitely one of the parts, particularly, for the calling of the show and knowing that everything, like the beats of the show and the rhythm of the show, you are in charge of ensuring that that's right. I mean, obviously the people on stage are as well, but to get all of that together, you're like the conductor. So, it's very, very reliant on that. And then I think, just the more shows I kind of did as a stage manager, like I worked with Caroline Fitzgerald quite a bit after I left college. And I think Caroline would have very much formed uh, how I am as a stage manager, very much so. Like she would have been quite, like, those were very text-based scripts, and like I was working with like absolute professionals like Tom Hickey and Bosco Hogan, Mary McAvoy, so like very established, really good actors. So like, yes, I always felt, because I was the least experienced person in the room, that it was my job to kind of keep up with them and ensure that what we are rehearsing when that magic was happening, that we still got that every time on stage. And Caroline would have been very much about that, about beats, about the rhythm of a show, and about keeping that as we went throughout tours and whatnot.
That's brilliant.
So,
I mean, you just described that beautifully, because being a director myself, I think that one of the key relationships that probably isn't spoken about a lot is the relationship between the director and the stage manager. And in that, those moments of kind of, to get that, that kind of something happens in the room, to get that. But I think that
sometimes I'd be so busy being like, oh, it's working, that's beautiful, it's all clicking into place, and then I'd be like, thank you, scrap what?
Just do it again, please. Do it again.
Exactly that again, and I promise I'll do my job this time.
But I think there is that sense of, I mean, you just said it there about the conducting and but also it's a big skill set to be aware of those rhythms. Do you know what I mean? It's one thing kind of being told that's the way it's going, in old, parlance of blocking, and they're going to move from here to there, and then the lighting cue there, and it's all very, academic, or well, not academic, but like mathematical, say, in one sense. But to have an understanding of the flow, or that must be fascinating to be in that place every night then, and watching that unfold.
We're the only people who see the show from the table read to closing night. Like, we're the only people who see those hopefully small changes that happen as a show grows. I'd never want to be too big a change. But yeah, definitely I've worked on shows where, like, opening night, the show's just about right, but it hasn't fully landed yet. And then by closing night, you're like, that was phenomenal. Like, everything lands, the pacing is perfect, everybody is confident in what they're doing. But I mean, directors don't even get to see that sometimes, and it's their direction that you're watching on the final night, and you're like, oh yeah, everybody nailed it, it was perfect. They got exactly what you wanted. Pity you didn't see it.
I go back then to kind of coming out of Dualig and Middlesex, and the sense then of, like, when you're working, say, with Caroline, and kind of starting out, like the certain amount of confidence and self-belief required to be in any room, but particularly when you're the one that's holding the book. you know, the sense of, because you are the repository of all the information, and not, I wasn't being flippant when it was like, did you get that? Because there is a sense that, and sometimes, you know, in a bad way, it can become a very invisible person in the room, and it's only there when there's a problem that needs to be solved. But in a good room, you know, there is that sense of that hub of knowledge. And I always say, like, it transfers in from the room to the side, whatever it is in the theater or up in the box. But that, the maintenance, with a confidence around that, first of all, and in the maintenance of that invisibility in a good way. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of that steady presence. That must be hard. From starting out, was that difficult?
It was difficult, but I think that I do think that definitely having a room that, like, those were amazing performers, but they never treated me in any way that I was less, even though I would have told them exactly how I was not that experienced. But they never treated me in that way. And Caroline was always, there was always, if I had a question, it was always open and easy to ask. And also Caroline would be very clear in certain things. Like, she started out as a stage manager, and she'd be like, you know, you might be asked to do this in another room. You don't do that. That's not your job. Like cleaning up. She was always very clear on that. That's one of the things that I learned very early. It's like, people expect stage managers to run around and clean up after actors. That's not your job. We don't get paid enough for that. And I'm like, yeah, no, damn straight we don't. And even Tom Hickey would clean his own coffee cups in my rehearsal rooms. So, but yeah, I think confidence is something that, look, fake it till you make it sometimes a little bit. But definitely within those rehearsal rooms and with Caroline, I always, like, the dialogue and being able to ask questions, and she'd ask me questions. It was very much, like, I learned so much from that. That going into rooms after that, it was easy because I did trust everything that I'd experienced with Caroline, or what I'd learned with Caroline, very much so. Like, and yeah, definitely fake it till you make it.
but I think kind of, because it's you know, it's amazing when you actually start. Sorry, just in relation to what you're saying there about confidence and fake it till you make, because I think that's kind of in life generally, but particularly within the arts. But also the sense of, you know, being in control, like whatever show. I mean, let's talk about some of the shows you've done in a while, but the sense of when you're on book calling a show, I mean, that's a pressurized situation without having to think about flow. do you know what I mean? It's kind of, it's.
But I think, like, for me, definitely, like, in rehearsals, generally, now not always, but the more you rehearse something, the more you get to know the flow. Definitely, like, in text and stuff like that. I think as well, like, when I started working, it was very text-based actory plays is what I would call them.
Yeah.
So, like, learning the flow of that is usually a bit easier because you have the script and the words are there, but, like, you know, the rhythm of a play, I can still hear Bosco and Tom in my head, and that show was nearly 10 years ago. You know, the flow of that stays with you, which is why even if you're in the middle of writing a note or sometimes looking at the cues for the lights or the sound, and suddenly you hear a pause where you know there shouldn't be a pause, you're like, because the rhythm's gone. You don't know what happened. You just know that the rhythm has changed and it's not the rhythm that it should be. For me, anyway, that's always a big thing. Like,
and does the blood run cold then when that happens?
Very much so, very much so. Like, sometimes I'm not always great at being on book, but, like, in the early days, like, when you're the only stage manager, you could be operating the lights, also trying to stay on book. And not to be ageist, but sometimes older actors, they might dry a bit more than younger actors just due to the nature of memory. But, like, I do think that was always a fun learning curve, because definitely the more you knew the script, the easier it was to shout out lines because you knew the rhythm, you knew the lines, while you could also be, and, you know, that would have been like those old Strand boards where you'd have to, like, that was changing lights, do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, I think I always think definitely rhythm of a play is important. So it helps that the stage manager learns that rhythm. That's why we're there and all the time.
But I think it's interesting though, because your career has, you know, I mean, you've done so much in the last 10 years, but it's spanned across, say, you know, production management and site-specific work. but also say working with companies like Anu, where they are text-based, but not really. You know, there's kind of a, I'd say rhythms become very different, say, from, like, say something like Once, you know, the musical, there's a natural rhythm to that. There's the songs, it's a musical, they have to hit it.
Yeah.
So actually, was that cool, having a love of musicals? Was that kind of really nice, kind of being in the...
It was nice. Once was a weird one for me. It's the first time I'd been like not the lead stage manager on something for a very long time. So I found, I think, being on stage during a show, like, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a lovely group of people to work with, but it's not something, I'm glad that I've done it because I've always wanted to work on a musical,
Yeah.
but it's not, yeah, I don't know. It's not, it was a bit weird not being the one in control. So Donna, you did learn a lot from Donna in that as well. Like, you know, I didn't always get to be under other stage, like learn from more experienced stage managers. And like Donna had a very West End approach, I feel like, you know, it was quite, so it was interesting in that way, definitely, like, but yeah, I don't know, I think I missed having the power.
Well, I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to, I'm glad you finished off that, because I was thinking that, but I would never have said. But I think there is that sense though of, because also with the power comes responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't. I think if you are a stage manager and a very good one, that you're kind of, if you're not leading the troupe, I imagine it's very difficult going, oh Jesus, I haven't got this fully. So you kind of, you know, chasing your own brain around a bit.
It's different, like, yeah, very much so. But also, like, you become, like, I've done it, like, a couple of ASM things, like, knowing when your cues are, but like there can be a massive gap between when you actually have a job to do. Whereas even if there's massive gaps between cues when you're on book, you're still like on high alert, ready to go. So yeah, I find that quite a difference. I find that every time I've ASM'd, like I find that a bit of a weird thing to try and get my head into. Because I'm like, I need to be on. Yeah. Like, I'm in work, you should be on the whole time you're in work. I don't know how to turn that off. Like,
come here, when you talking about this, so you did quite a lot of work with Caroline in the early days, and as a freelancer, it's kind of, you know, it's, you know, again, people forget that we always talk about actors going for auditions, but stage managers and, you know, designers and techies are also waiting on phone calls and also waiting, but actually in some ways can't be proactive. You're not called into a room and kind of go, stage manage this for me and see. That must be very hard.
Yeah, I think I always found it very weird, like a lot in the early days. I remember the first time I went to like techie Christmas drinks and like meeting loads of production managers and things. And they'd be like, so who are you? What are you working on? And I'd be like, I'm nobody. I just work on shows. I don't like, what do you mean? I don't know. And then I'd be like, hiding outside having a cigarette and be like, that person just basically accosted me and kept asking me who I was. I'm nobody. So like, yeah, I don't know. I always found that really weird. But then you see, once you start working with a producer or a production manager, generally, or a director, they're the people who start hiring you again.
Yeah.
It takes a while, but you end up, I think, predominantly working with a lot of the same people over the years.
So one of the, you worked an awful lot with Anu, with Louise, and with, you know, ranging from, you know, being site manager, like, which must be, being site manager in the Boys of Foley Street must have been a really, really, because I remember I was in the lab around that time doing, I can't remember what I was doing, but I was rehearsing something else, and the madness of not knowing what was show and what wasn't show outside on Foley Street. I think that must have been really interesting, that piece alone.
Yeah, I have to say it's one of probably my proudest shows that I've worked on. Like, it was mad. Like, I mean, we did 10 shows a day, if not more. We were like on call 10 hours a day, and like in Foley Street, and like dealing with the relationship kind of between like the offices that work on Foley Street and the actual people who lived in and around Foley Street. It's a very different area these days. But there was, and then us in the middle of that. So it was a really interesting dynamic. And it's also a big eye-opener to my privilege as a middle-class white girl from the suburbs. Like, the way the police deal with people in and around Foley Street was shocking, is the only way I can describe it. No policeman would ever speak to me like that in Rathfarnham. I can safely say that.
Yeah.
Like we were doing a test show, I think it was a test audience, and I was one of the site managers that was on the street. So my area was kind of between the lab and basically all of that street there. And you used to go down a corner to the back of a spar, and then there was like a car, and there was a few bits that happened down there. So the audience member went down, and then goes down with one actor, and then another actor comes screaming down the street, and it was Barbie Hughes. So Barbie Hughes passes me, goes down, and starts her scene, and then one of the lads in the cars pulled up. So I sat into the car because I'm like, grand, 10 minutes before this scene is over, and the next thing all I can hear is my name being screamed from the bottom of the cul-de-sac. It's like Barbie Hughes was screaming at the top of her voice, "Fiona! Fiona!" So I like legged it down and around the corner. There's two policemen with my cast member, Eric, up against, one of them had his arm up against him against the wall. The audience member was breaking her shit laughing because she thought it was part of the show. And Barbie Hughes is like, "Fiona!" And I was like, they had jumped a wall, so like they hadn't even gone by me. They jumped a wall from hearing the shouting and had gone straight against getting my performers up against the street. And the guard was like to the girl, to the audience member, "You think this is funny? You think this is funny? There's nothing funny about this." And I was like grabbing his friend, and I was like, "Excuse me, sir. Hi. Yeah, my name's Fiona Keller, and you have all of our photos on file in Store Street. We are a performance company working on a show called The Boys of Foley Street. These two people are actors, and that woman that your colleague is shouting at is an audience member." And you could see his face drop, and he was like, "Oh, somebody said something about this to me. I didn't. It never registered in my head." And like, you're one, like, I don't know how the audience member, like, I don't know how she got through that. Because like, obviously like nervous laughter. Yeah. And she obviously kind of copped halfway when she saw me. I think she copped that these are real policemen. Yeah. But like when you're that freaked out, and like, I just remember like having a chat with the two guards, but I was like, there's no way in my world that ever would have happened. Yeah. It's a very different world.
Yeah, fascinating though, because I think there's a lot in that, as you say, but from the company, from the theatre point of view, like in some ways you kind of go, Jesus, this is not that we're on something, but I mean that's real. Yeah. And obviously you're going, yeah, too fucking real. Protect people. But I suppose working in that environment, I mean, and they were extraordinary theatre company, that the work they've done is extraordinary, but trying to manage that, it's a very, extreme example of it, but trying to manage that space must be extraordinarily difficult in invisibility for yourself in your role, and also,
yeah.
And I don't mean control in a bad way, but controlling situations too.
Yeah, I mean, it's unlike any other show I've ever worked on, or any other style that I've ever worked on. But I think one thing that I think Gnu really taught me is like, while it may be our stage, it's somebody else's home. Like, we're guests there. So you have to respect the people whose space this is and whose space this will be when we leave. And I think that for me definitely is one of the bigger things. Like, I have a very different attitude to drug users based on the time that I spent on Foley Street. I have a very different treatment and view of homeless people, of working class people, very much so. And I would have always thought I was very open-minded, but actually spending nearly 12 hours a day in their environment and learning how to respect that that's their environment and that I'm a visitor there, and also being able to understand, like, they all thought I was a police officer. They all thought I was undercover because obviously of how I look and how I speak. And like, so a lot of people would have been very wary of me, even though they saw me every day. Yeah. They could see that I was maybe part of whatever was going on over here, but like definitely people thought I was an undercover guard for ages. Like,
because you kind of that, you know, I think fascinating because again, you know, on a film, for example, your role would be one of the most explicit ones because you know, in some ways, whatever you're, you know, assistant director or whatever, production manager, you'd be there visibly either with a walkie-talkie or a loud head or whatever, you know, it'd be you. But in trying to broker that relationship, say in more site-specific or, you know, Patrick's Festival, whatever the hell it is, that the public are kind of going, oh, what? And particularly with the new, in that you can't kind of go, yeah, I'm a stage manager, it's all you know, in the middle of the show.
No, but you would quietly go up to people and say that. And like, definitely like the alley that we kind of used would be used a lot by a lot of lads for drinking. That would have been where they would have gone with their cans and sat there for a good few hours during the day because it was out of the way and nobody would interrupt them. Yeah. And like, you know, it was a fine line between, obviously they get to see you and know you every day, and you're like, we spent a lot of time working in development on Foley Street before the shows. Yeah. So like we'd been there at least a good month before we even had our first audience. And like that, you know, everybody in the area started realizing that there was a show going on and that we were very respectful to people. You know, if there was people sitting down there drinking, you know, I'd go up to them 20 minutes before our first audience was due, and I'd be like, hi guys, I just want to give you a little heads up that we're going to have an audience here in about 20 minutes. You know, we're doing that show. And then a lot of them would actually just be like, oh, forgot you were doing that. No, we'll go to the park, we'll go on. And I'd be like, look, you don't have to move, but just be aware that people will be coming down and we'll be doing that thing, just so you don't think that you need to intervene or, you know, do anything like that. But they became really, I think because we respected them, they actually gave us a lot of respect and actually gave us a lot of space. And like that, it's not telling people that they need to move. Yeah. It's just making them aware of what's happening, and then they'd happily move on. The kids were different. The kids wanted to be in the show. They wanted lines. They wanted, you know, they wanted to be part of it. Yeah. And like, yeah, it's different for everybody. But like, yeah, with the kids, it's more like, now, what's his name again? Oh, yeah. And what do you say when you see him? And they tell you whatever line it was that they were going to shout at him. Like, but then that made the show feel like these people belonged on those streets because the people who owned those streets treated them that way.
That's an extraordinary, I mean, skill set, Fiona, to kind of have that, to be able to, you know, move in that. I'm not just talking about with the new, but I mean, it's the same thing of dealing with, I mean, respect is a huge, well, it's the word, but like when you're dealing with casts in previews or in technical rehearsals or directors who, you know, things might be working out, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, certainly that can only be really tested when you're working with people, say, who aren't involved, and if you can treat, like they just say, the lads who just, but that was their meeting place. But that's a skill set worth being proud of. And I think what's interesting about it from a new, you know, you go from there and then, you know, nearly a decade later with the Lost O'Casey, and lots of things in between. And I remember I was at the first Lost O'Casey when it was a development piece in the Abbey, and it was fascinating, just, you know, with the ambulance parked out beside the stage door, and it was totally, you know, you kind of go, there was no, maybe a bright sunny afternoon on Abbey Street, and you could have any one of a number of characters could have come into the back of that ambulance. But I think having that, and it's what Louise and the company do brilliantly, but also served by the technical team. I think, you know, having that space that we all know is not real, but we all, you know, let that go for a while. And I think that, you know, the skills in stage managing or production managing something like that must be just on a knife edge between kind of, you know, and I hate using the word control, but like, you know, being able to kind of go, okay, I know this is going to here, because they're very different.
But then you see, I think that to me kind of comes back to a lot of what the stage manager is. It's about knowing what the essence of a piece is that a director wants to portray. And you then are there to ensure that whatever parameters and like the changes that happen within those parameters still service the piece as it happens. But you can only do that when you have a very good working relationship with the director, with the creative team, with the actors, because at the end of the day, particularly with stuff like a stuff will have to change sometimes. That's just the nature of it. But it's also being able to know that stuff can change around, but the core line or the through line of the story needs to remain the same. And everybody needs to feel safe within that. Me, the actors, and the audience.
Yeah.
So like it's a very unusual way of working, but it's definitely I think a very cool way of working. And it's a reason I stayed with Anu for so long, like, because it's every show is different and the parameters around what you need to do are very different.
But also as a stage manager, you'd have to like it. It's not like sort of, it's like doing shows in the theater. You're not going to like them all you do, or you might, but that's very particular, And it's funny, you kind of work there. I mean, obviously collaboration with Kush came, but also you work between, say, stage management and production management, or, site-specific site management. And that becomes really interesting. I'm fascinated in those titles, I think you mentioned Marie Tierney, who's, brilliant lady. She's on the board here in Axis. And, the sense of being clear about what your role is and being clear about what the team is and being clear. And do you like moving between those spaces?
I don't think I'd ever really like to production manage a show, but the production management I've done has been on festivals. Yeah. So like, I miss being in the room too much if I'm a production manager, like for a theatre show. But I think what I like about production managing a festival is that you're still trying to connect all of these bits together, and also keeping what the artists for each of those bits need, and kind of ensuring that there's a connection or a flow between all of those bits. So I like that kind of side of things. But production managing just a single theatre show and having to do all that paperwork and no thanks.
But you were Benny for Kenny for a few years.
Yeah. So I worked on like I was the production site manager for like Footsbarn, one of the first years I was there, and then another year I was out doing Counting Sheep, which was an immersive show, and then the last year I did was Rough Magic's show in the castle for Midsummer Night's Dream. But I like that kind of, that's cool as well, being part of a festival. But like all of those sites were a bit mad. Like, I mean, Footsbarn arrive with their own circus tent, and like they're the most fascinating group of traveling performers who do their own tech. They erect their own tent. That's a mad company. So like, yeah, I mean, working on a site, just supervising them is fascinating, like, because it's a totally different way of working.
I love that. I can imagine someone trying to supervise Footsbarn. I think that must be a really interesting.
Yeah, probably the wrong word.
Out here. Come here. I mean, what's interesting then, you kind of talk about, like, say, working with Karen Fisher at the beginning is very, plays. But a lot of your experience, say, over the years has been in that, not mad space, but in that space where it's a bit more developmental or experimental and stuff, a bit more European kind of, influences. And obviously you've traveled enough and working, obviously then with Dead Center, you were with work that kind of exploded onto the scene and kind of has traveled everywhere. Like, say, Lippy, for example, just, I didn't know, it was one of the most fascinating nights in the theatre I've had in a long, long time, because I kind of was going, okay, what is this and where is it going? And it was actually only years afterwards that it really kind of landed with me in a bizarre way. But that show, from being stage manager on that, the elements in that and the flow in that must have been, really fascinating to kind of be part of.
So I took over. I didn't do the first Lippy in the Dublin Fringe. I took over when they were beginning to tour it. So when I took over, they had done it once. It had been a very tricky first preview from my understanding. And then kind of when I came on, it was kind of about solidifying what had been a month of pure madness to get it where it was, and to kind of distill it back into something that was ready to tour and get the book in, like there was a book, but get the book in a more concise order. Stephen was fixing lighting the first time we did it as well, but like I was sent a tape of that. I was traveling and I was sent a video, a recording of the Fringe show, and asked would I go out on tour with it. And I was like, this show is deadly. What is this? Like, I absolutely will work on that. That looks amazing. And then, I mean, paper though, I will have nightmares about shredded paper I was still finding shredded paper about 2 years after I finished that show.
That was one of my questions about this. I mean, like, for those that haven't seen it, there's a lot of shredded paper and dumped on set, and there's hoovers and all sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, I think, but sorry, you mentioned something that happens obviously to an awful lot of stage managers and, people in the arts generally, is taking over from somebody or taking something up for tour. I mean, and from someone like yourself who speaks so much about, being there, relationship with the director, development, that's really, really interesting. And same for actors, kind of, really interesting, taking something up and holding to what it was, but then kind of going, because you obviously have a way of, every stage manager's book's different. And so, that must be tricky as well.
Yeah. And I think for the first Lippy, the first Lippy that I did, it was a short rehearsal because it was still the same cast. So everybody was still the same except for me. So we rehearsed in Dublin, and then we went to, I think the first time we did it was in Germany. So like we flew to Germany and we were part of a festival in Germany. But like, I remember I still hadn't quite figured out the setting, the setting of the stage and the paper. So I remember like we took a break one of the days, and like Stephen and Des Kenny was the production manager, and they were like, do you want a hand resetting or doing anything? And I was kind of like, no, I actually think I need to do this by myself because I don't even know how to direct you to help me yet. But then I think I was in there for nearly 2 hours trying to get all of this back together. And I was like, why did I let them go? But, sometimes it is like, sometimes having somebody else there when you're still trying to learn something, it isn't beneficial because you get stressed about not being able to direct them to do something when in fact, all you need is to get your own head into the game. So yeah, I mean, that's always fun.
Then, I mean, I said those, and obviously you worked on Chekhov's first play as well. And I mean, Dead Center's work is incredible. But I think there's also elements of physicality to, say, their work, and also a news work that kind of, and you progress on into working with United Fallen kind of dance, because obviously with Kush came a part of a new adventure, but in relation to the dance piece, again, that's from a stage management point of view. How does that work?
Working on dance?
Yeah, as relation to books and in relation to kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it's different when you're doing a show. Like in a new, there'd be a lot of movement. In the Dead Center piece, there's a bit of movement. And like I've tried in ways to like write down what the dance is, but then quickly gave up on that and just film the dance. But then like when you're trying to write a book, so like I've doing Emma Martin, trying to write a book for what her show is a bit mad though sometimes. I mean, I'm not there are people who are specifically dance stage managers. I'm not that. I don't have a good shorthand for dance or anything like that. I'm not sure that there's many in Ireland who do, but there's probably a couple. But I think you write things like, on the fourth pirouette when she bends her knee, go, or and like I have a tiny bit of dance language from when I was a kid, but like not good. So like how I would write it is how I would understand it. So trying to hand that over to somebody else is always a bit like, so here's the video, have a look at the video, I mean, maybe look at this, but you might want to just figure that one out again as you go.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I often think I think that there's incredible value in, and I love finding books here that we've had for shows over the years, and kind of just looking at them and kind of remembering the show based upon the stage manager's directions in it, because you kind of forget, it's really, really fascinating, and not even for like remounting, with just sense of like memory, you kind of go, oh God, there was how many?
That's what that show was.
Yeah. Yes. And then I suppose then, working around them in between with shows and collaborating with the Abbey and kind of the Gina Moxley show, obviously, again, I mean, that was an absolute wonderful piece of theatre, and getting to work with that, and kind of, I think it's interesting you mentioned there about second the pirouette and kind of go on that. Has your working with all these different people, has your kind of style, do you think your style has kind of changed over the years, Fiona? Do you think you've kind of changed in relation to how you not control things, how you mark things, how you engage? I mean, obviously with experience things change, but just in relation to how you kind of record things for yourself, your work.
Yeah, I definitely think like I never really trained under anybody else. So the way that I learned how to write a book was by buying basically a stage management for dummies book when I left college, and started following that. And like when I was working on Where We Live, it was the first time that I really got to fully see other stage managers take a piece, see their books, see how they wrote things, see how they called a show.
Yeah.
And like Claire Howe was one of them, Laura Honan was another stage manager on it, and then Emma Cohen, who was kind of almost fresh out of the Lear. And like I was fascinated by what the Lear kids were being taught as well. Like I was like, is it worth the money? Let's see what they've got. But like watching looking at their books, particularly Claire Howe and Laura's books, I was like, they were immaculate. Like even in tech, they were really well kept. And like my book does not look like that in a tech. So definitely after, like that was about 2 or 3 years ago. So after that, I was just like, oh, I'd like, that's one thing definitely as I'm getting older, that's the one thing I want to be better at, is how my book looks, how it's presented. But then like definitely I see how they ran, like even their writing is very neat. My writing is not neat. So like me going into a tech and saying with the best intentions that I'm going to keep a really neat book, I mean, all well and good until there's like 30 minutes to take the last hour of the show. Then it's like my writing just gets bigger and like scrollier. But definitely I think that's one of the things that as I'm getting older, it's one of the things that I definitely am trying to improve upon.
Yeah.
And then like, I mean, obviously it goes without saying, but definitely like over the last 5 years, I think I'm a lot more chilled out in tech as well. I don't allow myself get stressed out about me delivering on my job. I just trust that I know now how time in tech works. We'll get it done. There's no point in me getting really freaked out when everybody else is getting freaked out around me, because it serves nobody. But I definitely didn't have that when I was teching big shows like a couple of years ago. Like, yeah, you could feel the pressure mounting. Whereas now I think definitely it's a bit more like, it's grand, we'll get it done. Everybody keep chill. It's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because it will be. And it's only a show at the end of the day. Like it'll get there, but you know, it's not life or death.
Yeah.
You'll all be grand.
But I think you're right. That's heresy. But but you're absolutely right. And I think there's a sense of because yeah, you can go down a kind of rabbit hole of panic, worry, and power, and all that sorts of fucking that stuff goes off the rails. But you kind of go, yeah, what's going to happen? It is what it is, and you're right. But as you say, there's kind of different levels of that. You kind of, there's all the young lads trying to get into a new show. There's kind of taking over shows. And then there's kind of, because I just want to chat to you about Medea in relation to the children, in relation to I mean, an extraordinary production. I just loved it. But the precision, in a way, because you could see it. You could see kind of that there was a play that they were playing, but that must have been an amazing process with Una to kind of get them into that space where it's, and for you to kind of go, okay, there's lots of stuff here. How do we?
Vidalia was a bit mad. I mean, we didn't have enough time to rehearse that show. I'm going to basically be very honest when I say that. Like, I think when they say don't work with kids, don't work with kids. Everybody just don't do it. Like, but so that show definitely, it was Una's directing, Darren as associate director, and like without that kind of relationship with the two sets of kids, there's no way that would have made it to the level it was at. Like it was very interesting watching two directors who have a very different style. So, and the two sets of kids as well had very separate needs and requirements. So obviously two of them were slightly older, like almost teenagers. And then the other set were a good bit younger. And even like the difference in attention span within a rehearsal process. I mean, that was, obviously, but you don't think about that until you actually see it in the room. And then
for you running that show, then for you kind of calling that show, I mean, obviously, one of one's greatest fears, from in a previous life being an actor and kind of, once you're on stage, you've no time. If you're on stage for a full show, you're not coming off and getting little kind of. But like they were on stage. So
on stage.
So like calling that show must have been an interesting piece for you.
Yeah, I mean, so like I had Sarah Jane was my ASM, and like we had her side of the stage on book so that she could. Ideally not shout, but at least whisper through the door, possibly lines if they were needed, or like it's very stressful having some actors who have years of experience on stage for an hour and 15 minutes without coming off. But to have, two kids, it's a mad show. Like it's mental.
But I must say it was worth it all because it was an extraordinary piece of theatre top to bottom. So coming clean, I was asking Fiona you a question on technology there, and the technology went AWOL. So I was saying going from working on production with young children and then on the street with the new and lots of other different things, but to working over the last 15 years, say with more AV and more technology involved in shows, and recently you worked on the alternative, which wasn't fully technology, but it was played a part in it. I believe that brings a whole other layer to a stage manager's life of things that can go wrong.
Yeah. I think I've been quite lucky, definitely over the last couple of years. Like, Oisin, who did a lot of the AV stuff for the alternative, he was there quite a bit on the tour for text and stuff. So, I mean, like with Lippy, we didn't have an AV person. It was between myself and Stephen Dodd and our knowledge of QLab, how we did that. Yeah. I mean, mostly Stephen Dodd. But definitely, I think because it's becoming a bigger part of shows, and thankfully the shows that it's becoming a bigger part of that I've been working on, there's always now at least a designated, if not lighting and AV, a specific AV person. But the kind of once it's in QLab, I mean, ideally, once it's in QLab, it's kind of good to go until you get, like if you're touring, then it's just about, recalibrating it for each venue. But that's part of a tech. So ideally, once you get to shows, that stuff's kind of looking after itself.
Yes. Yeah. And come here, with the sense though of that, I mean, you mentioned, there's the AV and the children, but then going back a bit to the streets and the carnies, you Mockness and Bram Stoker, and again a bit of both, because obviously in parades of that scale there is a technology going on, but there's crowd control and there's also looking after your kind of casts. And you mentioned earlier on about controlling Footsbarn, but that sense of trying to maintain a balance. Yeah, I know. Trying to maintain a balance between getting things right and kind of going with the flow. must be very, in the outdoor space, in the festival space, very, very teasing at times.
I think it's very interesting. Where like the first time I worked with Magnus, it was like very eye opening in the sense that like the people who usually run the larger puppets and the larger pieces have a really innate understanding of how it functions and what it needs. So really you've so much trust in what they're doing, but yet you're there to ensure that you're just there kind of more as a pacing to ensure that the audience have enough of a clear way that the fire breathers coming up behind you, there's nobody getting in their way, that again pacing, and that you don't fall too far behind, but if you do, if something goes wrong, that you're able to say straight away, we've got an issue, they're looking at it, I'm not going to get in their face right now, I'll get back to you in 2 minutes and let you know if we're going to be longer than 2 minutes. But I think definitely it's like a trust. I have a huge trust for everybody that I work with, pretty much, I think, because I don't know how to tell Magnus how to do their job. I'm just there to facilitate a company that have been doing really cool work for, I don't know, 30 odd years. I'm there to facilitate what they need, as well as what the Bram Stoker Festival needs in terms of the safety of the people watching it. So I think that's always I like that side. I like being able to facilitate the art, but also make sure that it's happening safely and that it's enjoyable for those watching and those doing it.
I think that's those three words you mentioned throughout this kind of chat is kind of, facilitate, trust, and respect. I mean, I think that's, I think an awful lot of that, an awful lot of the maintenance of those three words is within your role. An awful lot of times, for many, you said you mightn't clean up, teacups, but people do come to stage man. You know what I mean? It's kind of there's a kind of a vocational kind of part to it as well. And just talk to me about kind of the time we're in now, I suppose, when there's an awful lot of discussion around the future of the arts and live events, and and I think I think it needs to be shouted from the rooftops, is that like it's people like yourself and the crews and that are kind of in the most out of control area. For somebody, you say your whole life is about, your whole professional life is about controlling or kind of facilitating control. Now you're in a position where you don't know what's going to happen. That must be extraordinarily difficult.
I think it was really in the beginning, because like obviously you have the global stuff that's happening, but then when people were talking about it could be October 21 before we actually return to work, and knowing that like we don't qualify for bursaries, we don't qualify for grants, we don't create our own work, we're reliant on people making work. But I mean, do you need a stage manager if there's no stage or if there's no audience to watch it in a live event? I'm really good at managing large groups of people. I'm also good at managing a small group in a theatre, but I don't really know what to do if there's no people. So I think like definitely in the beginning, it was a lot, like just in terms of like what do you do if there's no theatre? But I don't know what I would do. Like I've never thought of doing anything else, so I don't really know what I do. But like I signed up for the open call on Ireland, whatever it was. I'm happy to short term do something else if theatre was going to be completely locked down for a year. But theatre is not going to be locked down for a year. We need to figure out how we safely go back to work, I suppose. But also I think we need to figure out, like for loads of people, not just for backstage crew, for loads of people, everybody knows that kind of what was happening beforehand wasn't working for everybody. And I think that as we slowly, because we're not all going back to work at the same time, as we slowly start going back to work, hopefully we can make a slightly better work environment for everybody involved. I mean, money's a huge factor. So that's definitely still an issue, because we're talking about making everything longer, lead-in times longer, but that requires a huge amount of money. And now I think what's actually going to end up happening is we're going to cut down on our production crews. I think there's talk now of, housing techs doing more pre-rigs, but then that means that less crew are going to be hired in on shows. And then there's people who are only really working in theatre as crew, and they're really, really good crew. They're the best crew, which is why they're on every get in and get out I've done in the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
But where did those people go? Are we going to now go back to, we can only afford one stage manager, so that stage manager is now the ASM, the DSM, and the company stage manager? I mean, I'm kind of glad that we seem to have moved a little bit away from that form of theatre, because that's what theatre was when I started working, and it was a lot like.
Yeah.
But I think one thing now is that there's a very much a unity between between all sectors of the arts. Firstly, I think that's brilliant and long overdue. But I do think now, like definitely on the Zooms that I've been on, there's definitely a more of an open communication between production managers, stage managers, lighting techs, and directors, creators, makers, and actors. So I'd hope that kind of going forward, that's something that we'll try and hold on to, that it's not front stage against backstage, it's not production crew and creatives against producers. I think hopefully now we understand that, look, we're all in this together, and actually until we really do unify as a sector, we're not going to be able to do anything, because I think we can safely see, even though we've just been given 20 million, that's nothing.
Yeah.
And we're now looking at maybe not even having a minister. So that's really dark, I think,
I think
for
you're
all of us.
I think you're right. And I think there's a lot of what you said, but there's a lot of truth kind of in relation to the going, because, we can only breed the change ourselves. I mean, we can only unify. No one else is going to unify a sector, but apart from the people that are in the sector. And I think for me, what's been very gladdening, throughout this horrendous, global pandemic and, the threat to our whole sector, is that people have galvanized, and particularly I think in the freelance sector, and particularly with backstage. And even though even though you're kind of talking it down a bit in relation to but there has been a sense in the years previously where that areas, and not an afterthought, everyone knows how important it is, but kind of forgets that people are also, freelancers. But I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about the future, but what's interesting to me here is, like, even running a center, it's the tech crew here that are leading the charge in the reopening. I'm not skilled in that. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's about that. So I'm being told what I can and can't do. But I mean, in a very good way. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of it's Sean here who I'm going, can we do that? No, you can't do that. But I think there's that sense, and similarly in the theatre, it's kind of the stage manager, your production manager. You can have all the dreams you want, but without those people employed, it's going to look like it'll be great for a night, but then it'll be kind of gone. I think has to be a realization within the industry of that. Because I would hate to be divided even between freelance and salary. There's all these things that these fissures kind of open up, and I can understand it.
And for me, I think, definitely, I think over the last couple of years in Irish theatre, there's started to be this real beautiful union between, the tech elements of a show, and they're almost a character now in a lot of the shows, and I think that language that's really started to develop in straight plays, in dance, all of that amalgamation of the different sectors and the different departments within theatre was getting into a really beautiful flow of, even on small scale shows and larger scale shows, where there was a fluidity and a beautiful language happening between the tech side and what happened on stage. And my big fear when all of this started happening was that we were going to go back to one-man shows with lights up, lights down, and all of that really beautiful work that's been happening over the last few years will just be taken away. Yeah. Because that's the sort of theatre I love to go and see. So that's the sort of theatre that I want to fight for when we go back. Yeah. I mean, it might take a while, but I definitely don't want that to just become forgotten about.
Yeah, but it's fascinating though as well chatting to you, because I think it's important that, and that's why it's important that a range of voices are included in these chats, but generally in kind of the theatre as well in conversations, because you're speaking like an artist. I mean, you're speaking like no, but sorry, I don't mean that in a facetious way, but just in relation to we're all involved in the same creation of an art form,
totally.
Whether one isn't making the tea or sweeping the stage or being on book or directing or whatever it is. And I think maybe there's a realization when there's an opportunity when we can't do it, of really recognizing that. And kind of going, we can't do it, so let's think about everyone that's in that room and value each of their roles, because the last thing you want to do is scarcity should only really exist in the audiences at the moment. We can't bring audiences together, so there's a scarcity there, and potential scarcity in the amount of people that can be on a show, fine, but scarcity in what you're talking about. I mean, Jesus Christ, we fought so long and so hard to kind of get out of that mindset. That really can't be allowed to come back.
No. And I think that's why, I know that everybody harps on about, we are actually quite a leading voice. And I think our Irish theatre was for such a long time the actor play, words, character, really good actors on a stage, but not a huge amount of, the O'Casey's and stuff, it's been the same costumes for the past 100 odd years. But now in the last 5 years, I think Ireland's finding its own new contemporary theatre voice. Yeah. And it's very exciting, and it's very relevant, I think. And I think our success in Edinburgh, I think our success in touring, definitely, I think we're valued more outside of Ireland than we are necessarily within our own country. But I think that we've come so far, so to go back is just, nobody wants that. I don't think anybody wants that.
But I think one of the major, and I'll kind of leave you on this kind of chatting about it, because it's great, because I think one of the most important things is, you mentioned respect and trust, and even the way you spoke to the guys drinking down Foley Street, but to ask people who aren't the artists about theatre. Jimmy, I think it's kind of, we're all in the same industry, so why would you not ask the stage manager? I mean, not necessarily in the room, but I'm talking about in their lives about theatre, because as you say, you're there from first read through till the end. So the history of Irish theatre, the operational history of Irish theatre, exists within your very bones. Do you know what I mean? I think that's because normally it's about crew, talk about crew or lights or gels or whatever. No.
They do. If you ever get stuck with a group of lighting techs, it's like, oh God, lighting nerds.
I know. So sometimes when I sit and kind of go, why did I ask that question? But generally speaking, very, very seldom, I think people are brought into conversations about plays that they've worked on as other than your job on it, or how do you feel about Irish theatre? And I think that's the opportunity within this kind of pause that we're in, to kind of go to recognize that from front of house to ushers to art, to actors to director, whatever it is, everyone's there and engaged in it in some way.
Totally. And we're all working for the same thing. We want the best art to be made. We want the show, whatever art form it takes, to be the best it can possibly be. Yeah. Whatever department we're in, that's all what we're striving for. And I think it's easy sometimes, in the stress of everything and in the pay disparity in certain roles, I think it's easy to forget that sometimes. But at the end of the day, none of our jobs are safe. None of us are here because we're rolling in money and it's a really easy gig. Nobody. So yeah. I think definitely when we've all been kind of stopped and put on a somewhat equal footing, it becomes a lot easier to see that, oh, actually, yeah, we're all on the same page.
But you also raise, I mean, it's all really great to be all touchy-feely and kind of, you know, isn't it, like, on the same page? But there is, you know, money involved in all these conversations and differences of, you know, people having, you know, I'm salaried and I'm blessed to be salaried, people aren't, but I think that's what's going to be fascinating about it, as you mentioned, and maybe a bit more looking at the equality in the industry, as hopefully more money gets kind of put in to help save our industry at the moment, that we need to really look at where that money's going and how it helps develop careers in all different sectors of our industry in a way that's not, yeah. But I think, there has to be voice and kind of fought for. I think it can't be kind of, oh, we're delighted to get the money. Of course we are, but you know, there has to have. It's not about a trickle down effect. It's about a building up effect, and kind of how can you make people sure.
I think, well, I definitely think that anybody who follows any form of politics can safely say that we all know the trickle down effect is not a thing. No. So, and we're supposed to be a socialist, equal thinking, we're all in this together section of society. That's why a lot of us are in the arts, because we believe that. So I think that we need to be able to practice what we preach, hopefully.
Yeah. That's a great way to finish this. And thanks very, very much. That was brilliant. It was an absolute joy chatting to you. And I look forward, I think one of the last times I kind of, in a professional capacity, chatted to you was in the mayhem of a tech for 24-hour plays, which I can imagine. Yeah. I can imagine people's books around those nights, or just probably just didn't even bother with them. But listen, thanks a million for doing this, and I look forward to talking to you very, very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me. That was lovely.